Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's CSG South webinar, All Aboard Passenger Rail Infrastructure Development in the South. My name is Drew Lebowski, and I staff the Economic Development, Transportation, and Cultural Affairs Committee of CSG South. The Council of State Government's Southern Office, or CSG South, is a nonprofit, nonpartisan member organization that serves the Southern governments of the United States. With regionally based leadership and perspective and national level resources, we provide Southern government officials and staff with a wide variety of programs and services that facilitate regional cooperation and encourage the exchange of information. As background for our webinar, passenger rail is receiving renewed attention across the country, and Southern states are increasingly evaluating how it fits into broader transportation, economic development, and regional mobility strategies. In recent legislative sessions, states across the region have considered or enacted measures related to rail planning, funding, and interstate coordination. At the same time, federal programs, particularly the Federal Railroad Administration's Corridor Identification and Development, or Corridor ID program, have created new opportunities for states to advance passenger rail projects, often with significant federal cost sharing. Today's discussion will focus on how Southern states are approaching passenger rail infrastructure development, including governance structures, funding mechanisms, coordination across state lines, and key implementation considerations. We'll also explore how states are navigating federal partnerships, identifying priority corridors, and addressing operational and infrastructure challenges. I'm joined today by an excellent panel of experts with experience across planning, implementation, and policy. First, we have Julie White, who serves as Deputy Secretary for Multimodal Transportation for the North Carolina Department of Transportation, and she also serves as the chair of the Southeast Corridor Commission, whose governance spans the southeastern coast from Washington, D.C. to Florida. We also have Maria Zimmerman, who serves as the Director of Rail and Public Transportation for the Commonwealth of Virginia, as the chair of the board of the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, and also as the vice chair of the Southeast Corridor Commission. Thank you all for taking the time to be here for this discussion today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thanks so much for the invitation.
To start this panel discussion, I'd like to frame the conversation around how states are getting involved in passenger rail, particularly through federal programs and regional coordination efforts. I'm going to start by asking one of our panelists a question, and if the other panelists would like to contribute, they can at any time. So my first question is, many states in the South are engaging with the Federal Railroad Administration's Corridor ID program. Can you please briefly explain how this program works and what it means for states seeking to enter or expand passenger rail service? And I'm going to start with Deputy Secretary White, please.
Thanks so much for the question, Judah. What's so exciting, I think, about what came out of the IIJA was this corridor identification program. Transit has long enjoyed a project pipeline with CIG to get projects ready, to move them through a system, to know that they have funding along that path. And so to create something similar with the Rail Corridor ID program has, I think, been really a game changer for us. So in the past, because rail has no formulaic federal funding, they're the only mode that gets no formulaic money year over year, we think of it as sort of hunt and kill. You would wait until some large money fell from the sky. So in the past, the ERA program in the Obama administration, then the IIJA, and then you better be ready to run at it. And so be prepared with projects to be able to submit them for competitive funding opportunities and then win those competitive funding opportunities, which means that you were doing things very piecemeal in the rail space, in the rail space. So what that meant is to people living in communities, it's like, oh, sure, we've heard about that project for 20 years, but it's not real because you're not building it. And it was because we had to wait for money to compete and then try to win. So rail moved very incrementally and very slowly. So the Corridor ID program is this idea that you do a feasibility study, you do a service development plan, you move through the stages of project development. And if your project has the right data, it makes sense, it's going to serve enough people, it's going to cost an appropriate amount of money, then you continue to advance with this federal funding matched with non-federal funding through all the way through design and construction. And so the funding levels in Corridor ID are really, I think, part of the great perspective of the match ratios. We talk about it a lot with return on investment at the state level. So what we tell our state legislators is the first chunk of Corridor ID is not requiring a match, $500,000 to do that initial planning, no match required. So let's get some quick funding on it. Let's start to map out what the possibilities are with this corridor. And then as you move into the pipeline, you're at 90-10 money. So 90% federal funds to 10% state funds. So return on investment for state or local funds, I should say. So in terms of return on investment, 90-10 money is great money from the feds. And then as you move to construction, 80-20 money, 80% federal funding to 20% non-federal funding. So it's a way to ensure that we've got consistent funding as we proceed to construction. Maria, what did I miss?
You did. That was a great overview, Julie. I think I'd just add a couple of addendums. One, that 80-20 construction split of 80% federal to 20% state, local, non-federal, as we call it. That's consistent with the same split for highway construction, for transit construction. And so again, thinking about how do we make rail investments sort of in parity with these other modes. The other reason I think it's just so fantastic to have a program like this is we know that transportation projects are complex, they're complicated, they take a long time, right? No matter what you're talking about. Rail projects are particularly challenging in ways that I think a lot of folks may not know unless you're really working on these kind of rail plans, right? Most of the rail corridors that we have in the United States are owned by private entities, whether it's a class one railroad like CSX or Union Pacific or Norfolk Southern or, some of the class ones. We have a lot of short line railroads as well that have some rail corridors. And so having those conversations to talk with freight rail lines really takes a lot of time, of effort, of trust building, of understanding of the data analytics. We can have a really strong case on the passenger rail side, but it may be the situation that the state of the rail, if it's just being used for freight, is not up to our standards for passenger rail. So that is a whole conversation in itself of what's that going to cost? What does it mean? Is it really worth it? It may be it's a really high frequency freight corridor. And so freight is really not interested in having someone else there to kind of share the track, right? And so again, these are complicated conversations that really involve a lot of different factors and ways that I think are very distinct and unique from the highway or the transit side. And so again, it makes a program like the CID program that has these different phases where you can do that phase one to see like, is it really feasible? Is the juice worth the squeeze, so to speak? Do you have a partner who wants to, potentially work with you to be able to move that forward? So I just kind of wanted to underscore the importance of that and why I think so many of us hope that FRA will continue to support this program. I will note that this is one of the programs identified for not being funded in the FY27 proposal from the administration. So for those of us who are tracking it, just understanding the importance and the value of the program and making sure those that we're working with also can understand that as we hopefully move forward more projects.
Amazing. Thank you both for the overview of the program. For the next question, for states that may not currently have passenger rail service or have limited service, what would be the initial steps for the states to begin participating in these federal opportunities? And I'm going to start with Director Zimmerman, please.
Sure, thank you. So I think, when we think about kind of what are some of those initial steps? What are some of those core steps? I think of the 3 Ps. There's planning, prioritization, and partnerships, and it builds a little bit on what I was just talking about as well. On the planning front, something that's really important that many states do. We do it in Virginia. I know North Carolina does it as well as some of our other southern states. It's that statewide rail plan. And this is, again, something that the Federal Railroad Administration, they don't require it, but they really encourage states to have something like that. We use it in Virginia really as our system. I won't say our roadmap, but I'll say our system plan, our visionary document of where we want to be. It includes both freight and rail and passenger rail. So again, it's a good planning document to think about the nuances, the needs in both of those types of rail. And so planning is really important as that front end step. We're in the process right now in Virginia and updating our statewide rail plan. So we're excited to do that. It will be finalized by the end of the year. We're doing a lot of public outreach as part of that. We've been surveying folks. We're going to be doing upcoming virtual meetings and in-person conversations and interviews with folks. But having that plan, we use that in Virginia. I just want to kind of underscore this. For us, having that statewide rail plan really set us up to be well positioned for the federal funding. So we actually have 4 corridor ID projects underway in Virginia. 2 of those my agency is leading, 1 Julie's agency is leading, and 1 Amtrak is leading. Those all came out of our current statewide rail plan that was adopted in 2022. So prioritization, I'd say, is the next P. So we got planning, we got prioritization. Again, these are complex projects, really being able to have a sense of doing those data analytics, working with your stakeholders to find out as Julie was saying too, there's different levels of funding match. How can you think about which projects might be good candidates for some of these different projects? Beyond the corridor ID program, we have the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program, we have the Fed-State Partnership, we have CRISI. So really thinking about what your needs are and how do you prioritize those based on what's eligible with the different FRA programs, what you're able to bring to the table in terms of match and project readiness, and really that case making that goes into it. And so I think we've been fortunate here in Virginia. We have a legislature who's been a really great partner of providing funding both on the passenger rail side and on the freight side through the Commonwealth Rail Fund that has allowed us to have a match that we can bring forward to help prioritize Virginia projects, we hope, as they continue to move forward. And then the last P being partnerships, really, having those partnerships between the state and local stakeholders with your private sector partners, not just the operators, but we have so many private businesses that rely on freight to get them where they need to go. We have employers who really value, having employees who can maybe commute those longer distances on passenger rail, but we also have tourism and economic development that also really sees the benefits of passenger rail investment. So just thinking about all of those P's, how they work together from planning, prioritization, and partnership. So Julie, you probably have some tips there as well, having worked on this in North Carolina.
Well, I love how you frame that up with the 3 Ps. I'm going to steal that and use that in the future. That's a great framework for talking about it. But I was thinking about sort of illuminating it with a specific example. So we have a couple corridors in corridor ID, and before they were submitted to corridor ID, we had done some really initial feasibility studies. I think it's a great place for states to start. It's something you can do relatively in our business inexpensively as infrastructure goes. And it helps you, I think, see, is this worthy of pursuing? And so doing the steps that you talked about, we initially did a feasibility study for the Western North Carolina corridor. It is our most requested corridor, a connection between Salisbury and Asheville. And people are like, I've never heard of Salisbury. Why would one want to go from Salisbury to Asheville? Salisbury is where on our main corridor it would link up. So while you're traveling between Raleigh and Charlotte and all of the communities in between, from any of those, you would transfer in the Salisbury station to go Salisbury to Asheville. So generally people just want to get to Asheville. And so we did an initial feasibility study, because the feasibility study will tell you what are your high level estimates of your capital cost and your operating cost? What do your ridership look like? Does that investment make sense for that level of ridership? Who are those railroads that you need to interact with, and are they open to this conversation at all? Is Amtrak, you're going to be your partner, and if so, are they open to the conversation? Your state DOT, I imagine it's hard to do without a state DOT. We love to partner with our localities. For us, we went and met with all the cities along the line and said, is this something you would like to do? And so doing that initial study, you're going to identify, are there roadblocks that are impossible to overcome? Does this ridership not make sense with this level of investment? And so having done that, when Corridor ID came along, we already had that data, and that meant we could be that much stronger going into Corridor ID. We submitted, I think it was 12 submissions for corridors, 7 of which were selected. And we're probably not that surprised by which were selected, given the level of work we had done to date with feasibility studies on those. So I'd say, the planning point that Maria made, like that feasibility study is a really good starting point to figure out, are there any major roadblocks you can't overcome? And maybe you need to rethink your termini or your investment or what have you.
Perfect. Thank you both. My next question has to do with the 80-20 match that you both were discussing. What strategies are states using to generate the 20% match to the federalist contribution? And I'm going to start with Deputy Secretary White, please.
That's a great question. When Corridor ID came out and IIJA, it was a bit of a scramble. There were all these matches that were needed, and North Carolina did not have a pot of money naturally to go and match projects with. So we had to really think creatively, and our team did a fantastic job. What they did is they went and looked into our state transportation improvement program, our STIP. So these are the projects our state had adopted and funded, and said, are there investments along that corridor in our STIP that could serve as match? And so because we have a really robust level of investment in our state in grade separations because of their safety features, for folks who don't know, you ideally do not want your cars crossing the railroad track. That creates the opportunity for conflict and accidents. And so where you can raise or lower the rail and the road to separate them, you're getting a great safety benefit. And so we had a number of grade separations in our STIP that could then become the match to applications. I know Maria has dedicated money, so let me throw it over to her, because boy, we're jealous of the dedicated money in Virginia.
Well, and I am just so grateful that we do have this foresight in Virginia. And this predated, for Virginia, predated IJA, certainly predated my becoming director. But it really started in the 90s of our state starting to make substantial investment in rail. Some of that was in the freight rail side, and it was to do things like upgrading the track, dealing with some of the railroad crossing elimination issues that Julie was talking about. We have over 3,000 at-grade rail crossings in Virginia on just the public roads. And so there were some of those early investments that, while they were helping freight primarily, where we had passenger service on those tracks, that was also a benefit for passenger service to have some of that happen, right? But I think it also helped to build a rail constituency and kind of the awareness by our state elected officials of, rail's really important. And there was a lot of outreach. We've had some incredible advocacy organizations, the Virginians for High-Speed Rail. We've got our Virginia Association of Railroads. We've got a lot of different groups, and really had been hearing from a lot of communities an interest in having better rail service in Virginia. And even in that time, I know hearing some of the past transportation secretaries, former Secretary Sharon Valentine was really instrumental for her community in Lynchburg, Virginia, which didn't have access to passenger rail. And she was hearing about this as a member who is representing that, and really taking that as a catalyst to say, how do we get our state to step forward? In part, as Julie was saying, the federal government wasn't really, a reliable funding partner. And so it was kind of like, as a state, you need to figure out, is this something worthwhile to kind of go in and go make it happen in your state. And so I'll fast forward, but we did have in 2020 some important changes that were made by our General Assembly here in Virginia that provided additional revenues into the transportation fund that then funds the Commonwealth Transportation Trust Fund. We fund it through a lot of different revenue sources. The gas tax is part of that, but there are also different fees and taxes and things that go into that. But it provides a very, pretty steady form of funding. We can project it out over several years, what we think will be coming in from that. So that's been very helpful for programming. And from that Transportation Trust Fund, about 8% goes to the Commonwealth Rail Fund. And of that, 93% of the funding goes to the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. That's all set in our code. The other 7% goes to the freight side and DRPT directly. That we can even use some of that money to help support our statewide planning efforts, providing some match for some of the federal grants, other ways that we can step forward. But that's really been a game changer for us on the passenger rail side. It's about $181 million a year that we have going to improving passenger rail service in Virginia. And since that funding measure passed, I just have to note we've had a 967% increase in ridership on state-sponsored routes. So we have over almost 1.5 million trips are taken on Amtrak just this last year in Virginia, either starting or stopping here in Virginia with Virginia riders. So making that investment, I think we're really seeing it's paid off, and we're not stopping. We're doing all kinds of exciting rail projects right now. I think we have 6, and I think we have 8 construction projects that maybe are underway across the state, including, the Long Bridge project that is a major bottleneck for everyone south and north of Virginia/Washington, D.C. And so being able to use these funds to help address these issues that matter to Virginia, but they really matter to the whole country, and they certainly matter to the South and how we kind of access and connect our markets throughout the country.
And Judah, I would add as well, Marie and I both talked about state money. I realize I should also talk about local money. So in this last National Railroad Partnership Program, NOFO, that we all just submitted for, we looked to our STIP, our State Transportation Improvement Program, and did not find any grade separations that were programmed in there for the next segment of our S-line build. And so we actually, for the first time, went for a large chunk of money to the locals. The Wake County, our Wake County partners have a local transit tax, and they had recently changed the eligible projects for that money to include passenger rail because they have seen the incredible opportunities at the federal level and wanted to see if there was a way to be a stronger partner in that. So we went to them and asked them to give us $125 million as match to a $500 million ask of the feds, and they did. And so there are urban areas, I think, that have resources that are significant that they can bring to bear. But there is also local resources in our small towns. We partnered with a number of very small towns along the S-line to pursue FTA grants to do TOD studies, transit-oriented development studies, and then mobility hub sightings. And it's one of my favorite stories. We went to one of the poorest counties in our state, Warren County, and we said, how about maybe you give us like $20,000 or $30,000 as match, and we'll pursue like a most de minimis feasibility study of a mobility hub. And they said, well, you asked Cary and Sanford for a whole lot more money, and you're going to take them all the way to design. Why can't you do that for us? And we said, well, we didn't want to ask you for more resources than you can give. We know you don't have a lot. And they said, we want all the way through design. What would that cost in our match? And we said, that'd be $3 million. And they said, we're in. They said, we believe that passenger rail is the best opportunity for our community to grow in economic development, both in a freight perspective and a passenger perspective. Warren County came with $3 million in match. So I think people really understand the power of rail to grow their communities, large and small, urban and rural. So local match is, I think, a really viable option as well.
And I know I spoke a lot, but I'm going to chime in a little bit more on this. And if DJ Statler, the head of the Virginia Passenger Rail Association, is listening, please forgive me. Hopefully I get this right. But I think what we've also been able to do in Virginia, I mentioned we have this kind of dedicated funding. It's coming in, but being able to use that also enables you to get really creative and think about working with the private markets as well, with bonding, with investing, with building that portfolio. We have tolling revenues here in the state as well that, again, you can start to really think about some public-private partnerships to be financing these projects, because they really are quite substantial projects. So even, it may sound like, oh, 181 million or, 3 million, they sound like big dollar amounts, right? But the cost of these projects sometimes are in the billions of dollars or the hundreds of millions of dollars. And so being able to think about how we can use public resources to really leverage those with private resources to make the projects happen more quickly, to make them happen more, I'll say cheaply, but they're still expensive projects, right? But I think that's something I've just been really impressed with our partners, both at VDOT and at VPRA, to really think about how you can make your money go further and go smarter. And so I just encourage folks who, as you're either looking at what you have or what you want to build, don't be constrained just by what might be in that public coffer. But again, how do you really leverage that?
Thank you both. That was very comprehensive. And thank you for incorporating the local aspect as well. That was a definitely significant factor. The next question I have is about interstate coordination. Many proposed rail corridors cross across state lines. And so my question is, how are interstate entities such as the Southeast Corridor Commission supporting coordination across states? I'm going to start with Deputy Secretary White, please.
Sure. So we have two different governance structures that we work with that are interstate. So one is our Virginia North Carolina Compact, and that is a bi-state compact recognized at the federal level. And it can actually directly receive funds and has. We applied for a grant recently and were awarded it recently to do cross-state bi-state planning. Our General Assembly, Maria mentioned Long Bridge. Our General Assembly clearly understands and knows it would be nice to build a line going north out of Raleigh to the North Carolina Virginia state line, but who wants to go there? Like, that's not a logical endpoint. We're trying to get to DC, and Long Bridge is equally important to us as it is to Virginia, because our trains that leave Raleigh, even on its current path, and go north, we send a train to New York and back every day, have to get across Long Bridge. So the compact allows that opportunity to plan together for investment, to work together on prioritization, to support one another's applications. We did a letter of support for Long Bridge and lobbied for that in Congress and explained to our congressional delegation why they needed to support it as well. So the compact is a great way to plan together, to build cooperation together, to advocate together. But then beyond that, we also look further north and further south that a rail network, because it goes such long distances, is usually multi-state. And so how do we plan with our partners, both north and south of us? And we do that through the commission, the Southeast Corridor Commission. And so we are not able to receive direct funding through the commission. So like our recent grant for the compact is actually going to study the whole Southeast corridor, all of our corridor going south, our high-speed rail corridor, but we do it through the compact. But what I love about the commission is it really creates the opportunity to build relationships with one another, particularly at the staff level. It's staffed, Maria serves on it, I serve on it. And so this is where we have regular conversations, regular planning meetings, where we get focused on what are the corridors we share in common and how are we investing in those together. So much of success in rail, as Maria pointed out, under partnership, is about relationships. It's about working together and cooperation together. And so these structures, I think, really lend themselves to that successful lifting of planning and projects. Maria, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I also, my hat off to you, Julie, as the chair of the compact here and the work that you've been doing. I've been on the job just for a few months with the new Spanberger administration. So I really am grateful and thankful for the work that you've done and that my predecessors have done. And I think in having this compact, we've seen for both Virginia and North Carolina, it's not a partisan issue. It's like, whether we have a Republican governor or a Democratic governor, there's been really consistent support. And I think the compact has also helped us to truly work together in that good partnership and with our other state partners through the broader Southeastern States Commission. And I know, just kind of thinking ahead, we mentioned at the beginning the Corridor ID program and the fact that we have some of those projects that North Carolina is leading, but there's a Virginia element to that. We, just did a tour not long ago with the FRA where they joined staff from North Carolina and from Virginia up in DC, took the train down, met with us in Richmond, had conversation, continued to go down to Raleigh and then further to Charlotte. And I think building those staff relationships has really been important. And I know we benefit from both of us having incredible staff, right? And I want to give a shout out to my staff at DRPT. I think, for me also just kind of taking a longer view, before this job, I had worked on rail issues in different roles and work that I had done over the years and had for a long time been following the work of the Southern States Commission that was working to bring back Gulf service. And so, just the dedicated work, and I think about meetings that I was a part of with Senator Lott and with others of like, how to get, that congressional delegation to really understand the South has such an incredible legacy with rail and such a story to tell, but also an incredible future, right? Like what can rail mean for the future of the South? And I think we've had such incredible leaders with that. And I was just beyond excited to see the reopening of that Gulf service last year. And I think it's again, a testament to when we work across state lines, there really is power and there's progress and there's real things that happen. So we're excited about our North Carolina partnership, but also excited to build deeper partnerships with Tennessee. One of our corridor ID programs is a Bristol to DC corridor that goes to our southwestern part of the state. Folks there in the Southwest, would love at some point to see extended passenger rail. We've moved it further south to Roanoke with some investments that are underway right now. But really an interest to kind of, can we keep taking it further south? Can Tennessee bring it further north? How do we, connect and collaborate on that? So I just think partnership is really the secret sauce to all of this.
Maria, you made me think, and naming the other corridors, great example of that for us also would be the Charlotte to Atlanta corridor. Very important corridor, lots of ridership opportunities, but our part of it is the teeny tiniest part. Charlotte is right on the border there. And so how do we use those partnerships to, benefit North Carolinians where rail exists in other states?
Thank you both. And then going off of that, you both were talking about the future and where we can go from this point. Looking forward, what are the key policy questions or decisions that Southern legislators may encounter as passenger rail development continues? I'm going to start with Director Zimmerman, please.
I love to think about how do we go forward with this, right? I think I'll say federally, I feel like, as Julie mentioned, IJA really was a game changer. And that Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act actually expires this September 30th. And so conversations are underway right now in Congress and at USDOT about what the future transportation bill is going to look like at the federal level. And this was the first time that rail was really, truly part of that federal surface transportation package. So if we're going to have a exciting future, I think it's really essential that we ensure that the federal government is there as a partner for us in this work. There's a lot of different ways that might look, ways it can take shape, but we shouldn't take it for granted that they're going to be there. I think we need to be talking with our federal leaders to really make the case for why rail in America is so important and valuable. And it's important on the passenger rail side. It's important on the freight side. This is a system. We can do great things in our individual states, but we need to connect. We need to have that network, as Julie was talking about. And so even investments way up in New York, whatever they're doing up there in New York, it's going to help us down here in Virginia and further points south, and vice versa, right? Our economies move across state lines, our people move across state lines, our freight is moving across state lines. And so I think first and foremost, now is really an essential time for everyone to be having those conversations. I think part of making that long-term case for investing in rail, I'm, as I mentioned, excited to see how we keep building on the momentum that we have here. We do have a lot of bottlenecks that still exist. And so if we're thinking about those 3 Ps, as Julie mentioned, we've got a little bit of funding here to kind of take a look at those bottlenecks in the South through this FRA grant that the Compact just got. But we're going to have to prioritize. There's way more than we're going to be able to do. And so how do we prioritize on what those could be, who's leading on what, and what that can look like? And I think that needs us to be in partnership. We can't kind of make that decision for another state, but what's happening in that other state really does matter to us. So I think that's really key. And I think, how in our case making, do we tell the story? And so, even just for us in Virginia, we've seen that rail avoids 1.5 billion miles of truck travel in Virginia. So that's a huge savings, even on the transportation side. I mentioned the 1.4 million trips on state-sponsored Amtrak. Those are often on our most heavily congested highway corridors. And if any folks have taken 95 through Virginia, it is not a fun, pleasant experience. Sometimes on a good day, it takes you 2 hours to get from Richmond to DC. Sometimes it takes me hours to get from Richmond to DC. But the train, I'm pretty sure it's going to be at about 2 hours and 10 minutes that I'm going to be on that train unless something happens. And once we make the investments we have underway, it's going to be a reliable thing. We're going to have a lot more frequent service. So making the case, putting it in terms that matter to people. And this, I'll turn it to Julie, because I just think North Carolina's done such a great job with this too, of really building very quickly a lot of support and excitement around its rail program.
Well, thanks so much, Maria. You make such a great case for the growth and opportunity in rail. So I tend to find that folks in the Northeast already get it. We talk a lot about the Northeast corridor. Congress talks a lot about the Northeast corridor. It's very bipartisan support. I think our job is to talk in the states that aren't in the Northeast corridor with our congressional delegations about why passenger rail matters in other parts of our country. And so to Maria's point about record ridership, we are thrilled to have experienced record ridership every year since 2019. So most people talk about how much their ridership has rebounded since COVID. We talk about how much our ridership has grown since before COVID. We are up 60% ridership since 2019 levels. We're now doing 750,000 trips a year, passengers a year. And with the investments we see in the S-Line and in the Western Corridor, we're just going to explode with ridership. So post-COVID, intercity rail really took off in ridership. It really hit the sweet spot of how people wanted to travel. It's the combination of the distances people are desire to go. They want an experience now when they travel, and a train is part of that. And where our rail corridors go. If, for example, in North Carolina, we touch a multitude of universities and colleges between Raleigh and Charlotte. College ridership is up. I send my daughter back and forth to school in DC on the train regularly. Seniors are using our trains to get home to families that now live in other cities in North Carolina. So this is really a moment in time of record ridership and connecting urban and rural North Carolina. So a lot of that support we've seen from local communities is because they see intercity rail as a way to connect rural communities to our urban job centers. So currently, if you want to find affordable housing in the Triangle, you generally move further out. Housing becomes more affordable the further out you move. So your commute from Raleigh to Wake Forest, a community north of us, runs you 45 minutes on a good day to, with accidents, an hour, hour and a half. On a bad day, on the train, it's 20 minutes. And to Maria's point, it's always going to be 20 minutes. And so as the triangle grows, we have 65 people a day moving to Wake County. That congestion is only going to spread and get worse. So the train is the way to keep that connection to the job center for folks who need to commute in from rural communities and want to live in rural communities. And so I think one of the things that I was struck by when we were in Warren County doing a presentation for them early on about what it would mean to bring intercity passenger rail back, one of the county commissioners said, okay, when will the train be here? That's what the elected official wants to know, right? Just tell me when the service will start. And we said, well, it depends on federal funding. It depends, whether it's reauthorized, whether we can win it through these discretionary grant opportunities and then build. We said, so it's hard to say. And I think that's the big challenge because we're asking people to buy in and invest in this. And so he said, I thought such a meaningful thing. He said, you know what? He said, we're in for that match. He said, because we have to plant the trees under which our grandchildren will enjoy the shade. He recognized that rail investment is a long-term game. And so having folks understand that we need those federal funds, we need them to be regular and recurring so that we can build faster, so that we can do it for this generation, not a future generation.
Amazing. Thank you both. Okay, so that is the prepared questions that I had for our panelists today. Now I'm going to go to the couple of questions that the audience has submitted throughout this webinar. First question is specifically about the work that Virginia is doing on passenger rail. And the question is, how can members of the public follow or get involved in the current updating process for the Virginia statewide rail plan?
Oh, what a great question. Thank you for asking that one. So a couple of different things. So again, my organization, the Department of Rail and Public Transportation, drpt.virginia.gov is our website. So we have a lot of information on our website about the state rail plan. We will continue to be posting updates on that. We are going to be doing our first virtual kind of town hall meeting will be on June 1st. We just set that up last night. So this is the first time I've got to announce that. So I think that's happening at like 7 p.m. on June 1st. You probably won't see that information on the website today because we literally just put it on the calendar last night. But we will have information on that. We will also be sharing as part of that, what we've been hearing from folks through the surveys. We will be doing another survey when the draft plan is out. We always are welcoming comments. If you want our staff to come down and, meet with folks in your community, let us know. Or if you want to, have a phone call, whatever it is, we really are in the phase of we are collecting data, analyzing that, and really wanting to hear from stakeholders. I'll also mention, I mentioned earlier, we have a number of construction projects that are underway, not just those that are kind of happening between Richmond and DC and the Long Bridge, but we've had projects going underway in Norfolk. We have a really exciting project happening out in our new River Valley, where we'll have this new service connecting Roanoke and Christiansburg, new stations out there. If you go to vpra.virginia.gov, I believe it is, or we can share this with Judith spread out too. They have great information about the construction projects that are underway. They keep it great job of updating with photos, with what's happening, with impacts. We've had, for instance, with Long Bridge starting in January, we've had to limit some of the Amtrak service during those peak construction hours. And so we've, tried to get the word out about that. We do have 2 buses leaving from Norfolk that go to DC nonstop to provide some relief on that route. And then we also have 2 buses that leave from Richmond. Every day, these buses are doing that round trip loop to try to fill that in. You can find information. You can do all that. You can book those buses even on the Amtrak website or app. It's pretty seamless to do that. So we're trying to get information out through our website. You can follow us on social media. We're also always pushing information out through Instagram, X, Twitter, you name it. We're trying to get the word out.
Amazing.
And this,
Thank you.
Rep Riser, I'm on the phone now. I was in another committee. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Representative Reiser. And for as a quick introduction to Representative Reiser, Louisiana State Representative Reiser serves District 20, and he serves on the Louisiana Commerce, Natural Resources, and Environment Committee, the Homeland Security Committee as well, and he serves as one of Louisiana's commissioners on the Southern Rail Commission, whose governance spans across Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi, and he has also worked on many transportation legislations throughout his career in state government. Thank you for joining us, Representative.
Thank you, and I apologize for being late.
And then the other submitted question that I have, and this is for all of the panelists, is there anything we can do at the state level to lower ticket costs in other states that impact our travelers? And the example that the person asking the question gave was the Amtrak run from Washington, D.C. to New York City, but we do not have to stay specifically on that. I'm going to start with Representative Reiser, please. Representative? Okay. I will come back. Oh, thank you.
So the question is on what any angles we get do to lower the ticket cost for the consumer.
Yes, sir.
So, I mean, I'll say this, and what I've seen legislatively, and it's going to say counter whatever the costs are, and just my observation, maybe with Amtrak, that you have an index that where there are some costs that you cover, and then you can't maintain the system you have. So, just my experience in government and watching government is that we never have kept up with inflation, and sometimes it's counterproductive that the service goes down, maybe the lighting goes down, the appearance of the vessel itself goes down. So I guess we start with that. We'll start with that, and I guess then go to efficiencies from there. Now, to identify an efficiency to lower the cost, just the actively bidding of the products thereof. But I don't have one identifiable, but I just always are one to make sure we don't jeopardize the safety and the quality of the product, if that makes sense.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I'm going to go to Deputy Secretary White, please.
So on the state-supported service side for Amtrak, which is how we do ours, the state puts in a certain amount of money to help run that service. And so it really is sort of a function of how much the state wants to put in versus how much they want to charge the rider. And so it's really, I think, an understanding of the metrics of how do you put in as little subsidy as possible while getting the biggest ridership benefit you can. You're going to pay for that train to go. So the more people who are on that train, the more money you're going to make. So, there's a lot of very sophisticated data tools now to figuring out where those sweet spot of those prices are to maximize that ridership and that revenue. So that is what we spend our time doing, making sure that those trains are as full as possible.
Perfect. Thank you. And Director Zimmerman?
Yeah, I'll say, well, one tip maybe, as somebody who does ride Amtrak a lot, it is kind of similar to the airlines, though I feel I can understand Amtrak's pricing easier than I can the airlines. But if the earlier you book, usually the cheaper your ticket is going to be. And so I know, even just since I travel a lot from Richmond to DC, if I book it, a couple weeks in advance, I can get a ticket round trip for like $32. And I can even go further north and just kind of price. If I'm waiting and I'm trying to do it later, like they do price the train based on how full the train is getting. So that's just like a tip of like go in early. Amtrak itself, they will have different deals that they will run. So we, as the state agency, try to promote those out when they happen. We do work with them on our state-supported routes that sometimes we'll have those deals, and they'll be specific for Virginia residents, or it might be for seniors or for families traveling with children, or we work together pretty collaboratively with Amtrak to try to look at ways that we can provide some affordable fares for kind of limited time periods, because as the representative said, we do need to grow ridership, and we do need to make sure that the fares are also helping to support continued system growth and maintenance and operation. And so again, it kind of all goes together of how do we do this in a way that again, we're being kind of good stewards. We're supporting our Virginians who are on Virginia supported rail. But part of that is working together with Amtrak to see how we can be strategic with that, while everything is hopefully helping to grow ridership, as Julie said.
Perfect. Thank you to all of our panelists for their insight on that question. And that is the last submitted question that we had. So I want to thank our panelists for sharing their expertise, and to everyone who joined us today for our webinar. Today's discussion highlighted several key themes, such as how federal programs are creating new entry points for states to engage in passenger rail development, how the states are navigating the funding structures that rely heavily on competitive grants and the matching requirements, a focus that interstate coordination is a central component of many Southern rail initiatives, and that implementation involves complex partnerships across public and private stakeholders. Overall, as interest in passenger rail continues to evolve, it is significant Southern states are exploring how these systems fit within the broader transportation and economic development strategies for each state. As a final note, please make sure to register for the Council of State Governments South Southern Legislative Conference that is happening in Lexington, Kentucky from July 11th through 15th for other exciting policy discussions across our 6 policy committees. And the early bird registration for that conference ends on May 1st. Thank you again for everyone for joining the webinar today, and for our panelists for their time to participate. And if anyone has any questions following this webinar, please feel free to reach out to CSG South with any follow-up questions you may have. Thank you all for joining.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.